Hey everybody, welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Got a great topic for you tonight. We're going to be talking about why the gluten-free diet fails for so many people. And if you're one of those people, stay to the very end. We're going to be talking about strategies that might help you better navigate changes in your diet so you can get the results that you're after. Now, before we dive into tonight's show, I'd love to just hear where you're tuning in from in the world. So say hello, don't be a stranger. Chime in, let me know where you're from. And again, say hi. And if you've got questions, you know, the quicker you get those pumped into our feed, we're going to prioritize the answers, or rather, we're going to prioritize answering the questions that get asked first. As always, we run out of time for questions, so make sure you pump that in. And if you know somebody who's going to benefit from this show, make sure you're sharing, liking on your social media channels so that we can get the word out. Hashtag save 100 million lives. That's what we're about here. We're trying to help people and change the world. So tonight we're going to be talking about oxalates. So if you're not familiar with oxalates, let's do a dive. Oxalates are chemical compounds predominantly found in plants. So they're part of the plant component. Plants use oxalates as a part of their own defense mechanism system. So plants use oxalates to lower their risk of potential infection, to lower the risk of insects, taking over, creating problems, to prevent excessive calcium buildup, as well as to provide structural elements. So these are compounds, again, found naturally in plants, and we'll talk about some of those plants here shortly. But one of the highest oxalate-containing plants that many people, in my opinion, overconsume is spinach, and we'll talk about why again shortly. So stay with me, we're going to get to it. Now, in humans, oxalates can be toxic in large quantities, and this is important to understand because many of the symptoms of oxalate toxicity can mimic the symptoms of gluten sensitivity. So, toxicity levels are known to occur between 4, this is a pretty big range, by the way, 4 and 15 grams a day. Okay, so if you're doing big smoothies, like big juicing, mass quantities of spinach, it's going to take quite a bit to achieve this level, but some people are more sensitive to oxalate than others. But medical research shows as little as 4 grams a day can actually be toxic and kill somebody. So we're not talking about even just necessarily toxicity, but we're talking about the potential for an oxalate to be able to kill you. Now, oxalates in humans can cause mineral deficiencies. Okay, so you got to be aware that if you struggle with imbalances in minerals, if every time you go to your doctor and your doctor's measuring your calcium, your magnesium, your potassium, etc., your levels are constantly coming back low, this might be one of the reasons why. That's a big takeaway from this perspective. Is that, again, oxalates will bind especially minerals that have a valence of 2. The chemical structure of oxalate, it has room to grab minerals that have a valence of 2. So that's like your potassium and your iron and your calcium and your magnesium. So those things oftentimes low in people with oxalate toxicity. Now in humans too, oxalates can cause kidney stones. And if you've ever heard of a kidney stone, if you ever had a kidney stone, generally they're made from calcium oxalate. So calcium oxalate, let me spell that better for you. Most people think, oh gosh, I've got kidney stones, I can't use calcium, I shouldn't take calcium, or I shouldn't eat foods with calcium. And unfortunately, a lot of doctors will tell individuals, hey, if you have had a history of calcium oxalate stones, they'll tell them to avoid calcium-based foods. And this is actually one of the worst things you can do because calcium deficiency can actually increase oxalate toxicity. And that's something that we don't want to see happen either. Now, we'll talk more in depth about that in a minute. But kidney stones, the predominant type of kidney stone isolated and identified in individuals is known as a calcium oxalate stone. You can also have magnesium-based stones and other stones, but calcium oxalate are the most common. And then we got crystal deposition that can occur with toxicity of oxalates. What does that mean? So Any of you ever heard of gout? Gout is a form of uric acid crystal. Well, oxalate toxicity can cause oxalate crystals. So oxalate crystals can form, and those can deposit into your tissue. Now, two of the places that we'll see oxalate toxicity occur kind of more frequently is one is in the joints itself. It can mimic diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, and it can mimic conditions or exacerbate conditions like fibromyalgia and lupus. So think of autoimmune arthritis. Again, the potential for oxalate can be there. But also for females, this is a big one. So the bladder itself. And so if you've ever heard of, there's a condition called interstitial cystitis, which is very, very painful. But this has actually been linked to oxalate toxicity or oxalate formation, which can create extreme bladder pain. So women are more susceptible to this particular manifestation. So if you suffer with interstitial cystitis or IC, you might just consider that oxalate toxicity is part of that problem. Okay, so let's moving on here. So let's talk a little bit about gluten sensitivity. Because gluten sensitivity increases the risk for oxalate toxicity. Now, aside from the fact, those of you, and so let's maybe poll, how many of you have been tested properly for gluten sensitivity tonight listening to the show and have a gluten-related issue? If you've got a gluten issue, just type in gluten into the box and let me know. But gluten sensitivity can increase the risk for oxalate toxicity, and there's several mechanisms why. One is fat malabsorption. So this is true especially in celiac disease. Celiac disease, one of the common hallmark side effects of celiac disease is damage to the villus atrophy in the small intestine, which leads to fat malabsorption. And remember that components of bile and fat can help to minimize oxalate absorption. And so this is one of the reasons why those with gluten issues, especially with celiac disease that suffer with fat malabsorption, can actually have an increased risk for development of oxalate toxicity. We also have nutritional deficiency can increase the risk. So for example, low levels of calcium and magnesium, low levels of zinc and iron, low levels of vitamin B6. Vitamin B6 plays a role in metabolizing oxalate. So if you have nutritional deficiencies of these particular nutrients, which by the way, this is very, very common to see this handful of nutrients in people with gluten issues. Remember, gluten causes malabsorption, not just fat malabsorption, but also vitamin and mineral malabsorption. And so these nutritional deficiencies can increase your risk for oxalate toxicity. So again, now gluten sensitivity, aside from that, so let's just kind of draw a line here. So one of the other things that can happen is that we see is that people who maybe don't know they're gluten sensitive and they have a high gluten diet. So high gluten diet, because pretty much all of the grains, so maybe you're not grain free at this point, and what are called pseudograins, and if you don't know what a pseudograin is, a pseudograin technically is not a grain, but grains are your wheat, your barley, your rye, your oats, your corn, your rice, your millet, your teff, whereas pseudograins are technically not grains, but your millet, your buckwheat, not your millet, your buckwheat, your amaranth, and your quinoa are considered pseudograins. But grains and pseudograins are extremely high in oxalate. And so some people that struggle with, for example, with kidney stone formation, increased kidney stone formation, a lot of times we'll see that the kidney stone formation will diminish going on like the no grain, no pain diet plan as a result of removing these grains, because when you remove these grains, you lower your oxalate consumption, but also when you remove grains, if you're gluten sensitive, your GI tract has the ability to heal, right? And you can become better nourished as a result of the lack of damage that gluten can cause. Now, one other thing I didn't really write down, but I'm going to kind of mention it here, is we know that gluten causes leaky gut. And so if you've got a leaky gut issue, this can increase oxalates from your gut to your bloodstream. So leaky gut can allow oxalate crystals to travel from your gut easier indirectly into your bloodstream, where then they can go travel through your bloodstream and get lodged into different tissues. Oxalates, much like gluten can affect any tissue in the body, oxalates can affect any tissue in the body, but where clinically where we seem to see oxalates really show up in a big way is interstitial cystitis and rheumatological arthritis, so diseases that look like, autoimmune arthritis, if you will. So let's see here. Let's move over. I wanted to show you a couple of different things. Now, one of the other things that can increase your risk of oxalate toxicity is right here, is antibiotics. Now, antibiotics, why can antibiotics increase the risk of oxalate toxicity? Two big reasons. And you can see these are research studies. In this particular study, you can see there's a type of bacteria called Oxalobacter fermengens, or fermengens, and its potential role in human health. Okay, down here, what we see is that this particular bacteria is known to help break oxalates down when you eat. This bacteria lives in your GI tract. And so if you have healthy populations of Oxalobacter, and this has actually been studied, people with healthy populations of Oxalobacter are not as impacted or affected by dietary oxalates, meaning that their healthy guts with robust bacteria can break oxalates down and get them out easier. Versus if you've got a long history of antibiotics, remember with those antibiotics, right? What do antibiotics do? Antibiotics can destroy or knock out your healthy gut flora. So we don't want to see that happen. So you see here, this study showing the benefit of Oxalobacter. Now, another type of bacteria that helps to break down oxalate is Lactobacillus. So this is a common one found, if you ever make your own sauerkraut, ferment your own foods, like your own vegetables, like the perfect one is sauerkraut, because cabbage is a low oxalate vegetable, and when you ferment it with bacteria, Lactobacillus is one of the main species that grows. This type of bacteria has also been shown in some research studies to lower oxalate absorption and to reduce oxalate flow into your bloodstream. Now, in this research study, you can see here the use of antibiotics, and the risk of kidney stones. Well, in summary, you can see here recent evidence suggests a possible causal role, very important, causal role of antibiotics in the development of kidney stones. Let's just highlight that for you. So this is basically saying if you are one of those individuals that potentially has taken antibiotics multiple times throughout your life, we now have research is showing a causal role, meaning antibiotics can actually cause an increased risk for the development of kidney stones. So antibiotics are another thing that can, in a very, very big way, increase the risk of oxalate toxicity. Remember, one form of oxalate toxicity is a kidney stone. And those of you who've ever had a kidney stone know the level of pain that can really cause. So oxalates and disease. What do we know about oxalate in the relationship to disease? Oxalates can increase the risk for inflammatory bowel diseases. Little tiny crystals. Oxalates are little tiny crystals, and so they can be little tiny shards. It's like little tiny glass shards that can cut and lacerate your tissue microscopically. So inflammatory bowel disease. Well, what is that? Inflammatory bowel disease. That's ulcerative colitis. It's Crohn's, and it's celiac disease. So celiac disease. And then we got arthritis. I mentioned earlier rheumatoid arthritis, but lupus. Okay, there's research now showing that oxalates might have linkage to autism and then interstitial cystitis. I'm going to show you more. Actually, let's go ahead and pull that up. Here, let's see here, kind of a bigger, longer list of different problems. Okay, so you can see here, oxalate toxicity, common symptoms, abdominal discomfort. So we're going back and forth in between disease and symptoms because I want you to understand both. In essence, you may have abdominal discomfort, but you may not have yet developed inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis or celiac. So remember, these diseases typically start as discomfort before they manifest as disease. So we're thinking about kind of symptoms of oxalate toxicity. Pain. So you can get, where I see this is very commonly in the wrists, I see it in the knees, I see it in the feet, in the toes. It sometimes will mimic gout. Okay, so those of you who maybe don't or do know what gout is a disease where your big toe can swell really big, turn really, really red. Gout commonly affects the toes, but oxalate crystal toxicity can affect the toes as well, particularly the big toe, and it can mimic gout. And so one of the things I've actually seen this happen, people have come to see me, they were diagnosed with gout, they didn't have gout, they actually had an oxalate problem, okay, an oxalate toxicity problem, and so they were on a medicine. There's a particular type of medicine called allopurinol, which is used to treat gout because it helps with the clearance of uric acid. And it doesn't, in these cases where somebody has what doctors are calling gout, but it's not been properly diagnosed or it hasn't been accurately assessed, and they don't really have gout, allopurinol is not going to do anything for you. So if you've got a diagnosis of gout and you're on allopurinol and you get zero relief, go back to your doctor and ask them about measuring for oxalates, running what's called an OAT or an oat test, and that's not like eat your oats, but that stands for organic acids test. And this can be done to help rule out whether or not you have an oxalate toxicity issue or an overabundance of oxalates. One of the other things you can do, if your doctor won't run a test for you, is you can go on a low oxalate diet. I'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute. But pain anywhere in the body, but again, particularly that pain oftentimes can mimic rheumatological or autoimmune arthritis. So again, it doesn't have to be rheumatoid arthritis or gout. It can actually mimic a number of different painful conditions. As I mentioned earlier, interstitial cystitis is pain in the bladder, so pain on urination. That comes back down here to urinary problems, but the urinary problems again can create pain in the bladder. So pain anywhere in the body, and again, pain is a symptom or a manifestation. For some people, diarrhea or constipation, oxalates can contribute to. Brain fog is a big one. Again, these things, just like they can get through the blood-brain or the GI tract barrier, they can also get through your blood-brain barrier and potentially damage neurologically, create neurological symptoms, and brain fog being one of those. Muscle weakness is a common symptom associated with it. Mood changes or mood swings, these two go hand in hand, right? With brain fog comes mood changes, irritability, that type of thing. Muscle weakness, lack of coordination, this can be neurological, but it can also be part of that muscular weakness. As the crystals deposit into the tissue and damage the tissue and create inflammation in the tissue, it can create the kind of systemic breakdown. You remember going back to what we've talked about before, when this type of thing happens, your body tries to respond by increasing cortisol output because cortisol reduces inflammation. But unfortunately, if this happens for a long time, so chronically, if this is happening and you don't know it, and it happens for a year, 2 years, 3 years, that increased cortisol over time will also lead to loss of muscle. So it will degrade your muscle tissue. It leads to muscle loss, which then leads to joint compression and greater degrees of pain. So then you end up developing more than one problem. Maybe a problem that started with oxalate toxicity, but manifested over time as chronic inflammation, which led to the hormonal imbalance and muscle wasting effects of that chronic inflammation. And then fatigue. Fatigue, a very, very common side effect. If you struggle with fatigue, maybe you're following a gluten-free diet, maybe even you're following a grain-free diet, like what's in No Grain, No Pain, and you're still struggling. Like, this is one of the things you might want to think about. Again, might want to ask your doctor to help test you for. And then skin rashes and skin lesions also can be a manifestation of oxalate toxicity. So all those things in combination can create problems that you want to be aware of. So if you're struggling with those things, but you've already changed your diet, that you want to definitely be aware of. Let's see here. I want to pull up another image for you.
Scroll the page to the left.
Yeah. Thanks.
That's
Yeah, so we were missing it here. So again, this next one, you can see here what contributes, kind of in summary. You've got gut inflammation. So it's kind of a double-edged thing here. Gut inflammation can increase oxalate toxicity, but oxalate toxicity can also cause gut inflammation. Medications. Okay, we said, and I mentioned antibiotics, but it doesn't stop at antibiotics. Medications come in the form of lots of things that can damage your GI tract. Actually, I did a really extensive show on medications that can cause leaky gut and gut problems, but some of the more common ones are pain medications, especially non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, NSAIDs, if you will. This class of medication is notorious for damaging the GI tract. Certain blood pressure medicines can damage the GI tract, particularly if you're on something called an ARB. ARB stands for angiotensin receptor blocker. So ARBs are drugs that actually have been shown to actually cause or mimic celiac disease. So these blood pressure medications, particularly if you've been on one of these and you suspect oxalate toxicity, again, go back to your doc and make sure. We mentioned as well, grains contribute to oxalate toxicity. Why? Because they're super high in oxalates, but also if we're talking about gluten, gluten damages the GI tract, so oxalates that are coming through in your diet can actually penetrate into your bloodstream and start depositing into your tissues a little bit easier. And then eating foods that are too high or eating too many foods that are high in oxalates can also contribute to this. Now, I want to be real cautious in talking with many of you because some of you may already feel like it's overwhelming, like you've changed your diet already and you feel like really super food restricted. So tonight I'm not talking about oxalates as kind of a carte blanche for all of you to just stop any food that has oxalate in it. What I'm trying to do is share information that might have bearing on why you might be still struggling. So we're going to talk about these high oxalate foods in just a minute. And then yeast overgrowth. There's some research that shows that specifically yeast can contribute or can produce oxalates as part of their element. So yeast overgrowth in the GI tract can oftentimes play a role in oxalate toxicity as well. So if you struggle with chronic yeast infections or yeast overgrowth, you want to be cautious there. So let's talk about some of the high oxalate foods. Now, kind of note of caution here with high oxalate foods. So again, what I'm not telling you is to just go and stop eating everything that's on this list tomorrow. What I'm telling you is to pay attention, because what a lot of people come and tell me is, Dr. Osborne, I know that I'm supposed to feel great when I drink a green smoothie, and my sister feels fantastic when she does it, but every time I use a bunch of spinach in my green smoothie, my joint pain is worse. I feel terrible, right? These are the kinds of things that you want to pay attention to when you're consuming foods on this list that we know are super high in oxalate, and you're experiencing symptoms of oxalate toxicity, and you're already following a grain-free diet, and by all intents and purposes, you feel like you're doing everything right, but you're still struggling. You still have the symptoms that we've talked about. This is where you start looking at these different foods as possible triggers. So if you find yourself consuming these, and these are all your staple foods, and you're still struggling, now we've got to come back and look at it even a little bit more closely. But it begins initially with just some frank observations. What I see a lot of times happen in people that go grain-free initially is they heavily gravitate to lots of almonds in the form of almond flour, right? They just try to replace all of their baking that they used to do with wheat flour or other forms of grain-based flours, and they just switch everything over to almond flour. And that we got to remember, almonds are very high in oxalate, and so that could be a potential reason as well. I also sometimes will see people gravitate to when they're trying to be healthier, to eat more greens. And so I've mentioned, you've probably all heard me talk about this before, but you'll notice there's a lot of vegetables on that list. And a lot of people think, oh, vegetables, those are good for me because they're vegetables. And there's a lot of broad sweeping generalizations about how a vegan or a vegetarian diet is somehow healthier than a non-vegan or a vegetarian diet. And that's not true for everybody. We can't use broad generalizations that way. Some of you may do better on a vegetarian diet and tolerate oxalates just fine. That's okay too. However, in our history, oxalate toxicity was actually seasonal. And one of the things that we saw researchers and doctors would look at was in the spring and in the summer, we would see more people struggle with these symptoms. Why? Because these vegetables were coming into season. And so we have these vegetables in the spring and summer in higher quantities, the greens in higher quantities. So oxalate toxicity was a very real problem seasonally speaking. Well, in today's world, we kind of don't stick to seasons. Like if you want a spinach salad, you can have a spinach salad in the middle of the winter, right? You just go to the grocery store and you buy. All these things are available 24/7. And so again, with the popularity of vegetarian and plant-based diets, some people still struggle. They think they're doing everything right and they're still struggling in their health and they're not feeling better. They're actually feeling worse. You've got to look at this and you've got to suspect the potential for that high oxalate, okay, for that high oxalate level to be part of your problem, especially if you have a history of gluten sensitivity, of chronic use of medications that damage the GI tract or that damage the flora, the healthy bacteria that live inside of you. Remember that one of the reasons we think that many people struggle with oxalate issues is they don't have adequate gut flora to representing them to break oxalate down from their diet and to help excrete it out. And so it's that lack, right? As I showed you earlier with some research, that antibiotics can actually cause kidney stones because they damage the gut bacteria that's helping you get rid of oxalate. And so those of you who have a long history of use of antibiotics or use of medications for the GI tract or for chronic pain, that you could have damaged your GI tract and created a scenario where you've become toxic or you've become reactive to oxalate or more susceptible to oxalate toxicity. So some of you may be saying, gosh, if I do this, I'm going to be so limited on my food. Look, it's not about starting this plan tomorrow. It's about paying attention, because if you see that many of the aspects or many of the elements from this high oxalate diagram here are part of your diet, then now you want to start again potentially peeling them back. Now, one other thing that we do oftentimes see, and I will mention, is that you may not have a history of antibiotic use. Like, you may not be that person that's taken antibiotics 6 times this year, but you may not filter your water. You may be drinking kind of that chlorinated, fluoridated water. And so in that case, you have to understand that chlorine and fluoride are both natural antibiotics. They will both knock out healthy bacteria as well. So those can also predispose you to minimizing your gut microflora and leaving you exposed to potential for oxalates, creating a reactivity. So again, a lot of your green leafies, these are your big sources from vegetable perspective, but you can see some other things here that are staples in many people's diets when they go grain-free, including that sweet potato right there. Okay, but potatoes, sweet potatoes, beets, tomato sauce, carrots, celery. There are lots of people pounding celery juice these days, and I've had a number of people tell me how much worse they feel doing that. And then artichoke, and then snap peas or okra or parsnip. So again, some of these are root vegetables. Not all of them are greens, but again, your leafy greens can be very, very high in oxalate. And then you've got some fruits that can be very, very high in oxalate as well. And so you got to be cautious of those things. And then the beans, pretty much all beans except mung beans, soybean and its byproducts, which is used in a lot of vegetarian-based diets, and then nuts, your almonds, your cashews, your peanuts, and pine nuts. And technically, cashew is really a seed, so it's not really a nut, but we put it under that nut category because most people don't realize that. And then peanut technically is not a nut either. It's a legume, which falls more under the bean category, but that's okay. Most people don't see it that way, so we put it under that nut category. So peanuts, cashews, almonds, pine nuts, and then seeds, chia, poppy, hemp, and sesame seed. If you really want to eat a seed, if you miss the seeds, one of the better ones to use is pumpkin seed, very, very low oxalate. It's one that also is very high in magnesium, which it can be very, very helpful. And then chocolate, I know ladies, you're probably cussing me in your minds right now, but chocolate and cocoa powder also can be very high in oxalate. Some people do react to them. And then some of your herbs and spices. Now, I know probably half the world right now is pumping turmeric, but I see this in about 1 out of every 10 people that take turmeric. As they report back to me, I feel worse taking turmeric as an herb or a spice. So if you're one of those, like if you've tried turmeric supplements, if you're using a lot of turmeric, just be cautious, be aware that, oxalate might be part of your issue, okay? And then black and green teas can also be very, very high in oxalate. So if you're a big green tea drinker and you find that it bothers you, but you're drinking it because you've been hearing about the touted health benefits, and that brings me to another point. So many people will do the wrong thing. Like they'll do something that they've heard is good for them because they heard it was good for them, but when they do it, they feel worse, right? And so this should go without saying, but if that happens to you, listen to your body. Listen to your body. Your body's trying to talk to you. And if you feel worse eating a particular food, regardless of what the health benefits are, whether it's a superfood or not, like listen to your body. So again, these are just examples here of high oxalate foods, and some of them are things that people do on a regular basis to supposedly fight and help inflammation. So next, let's talk about low oxalate foods. So I'm going to point out some things here. We got meat, we got eggs, we got seafood, which is meat, okay, and largely fat, okay? So fat, and even olive oil is low oxalate. So you saw olive on the oxalate list, but olive oil is very low oxalate. So generally your oils, as an overall rule of thumb, are very low oxalate. So meats and fats. Now, this is one of the reasons why we're seeing increased popularity of the carnivore diet. So if you've heard of the carnivore diet, it's kind of an all meat-based, all animal-based diet without vegetables and fruits and nuts. And it's many of the people that find the carnivore diet like a level of health above and beyond what they thought has to do with the oxalate toxicity issues. So what they're doing by going carnivore, it's not necessarily that eating more meat is generally more healthy. It's that by not poisoning themselves with an overabundance of oxalates, they feel better. They have less brain fog. They have more energy. Their guts are better. They work better. They digest better. They just feel overall a better sense of well-being changing to this type of diet. I will say this. I'm not opposed to the carnivore diet. I'm not opposed to the keto diet. I'm not opposed to a gluten-free diet or a low oxalate diet. But I would just say, if you find this to be true, just be cautious long-term, staying on it for years and years and years. Because sometimes the issue is, as I mentioned before, oxalates, these are high oxalate foods, but if you work on minimizing these and you start feeling better, okay, you start feeling better and you're doing things right, your gut's recovering, your overall health and constitution is improving, you might find that you really don't have this permanent oxalate issue. You might find that you were eating so much oxalate-rich food that it led to so much oxalate crystal deposition that you were just overwhelmed by it, and your kidneys lost their ability to properly excrete it faster than you were bringing it in. And so going back over here, you might find that you feel better on a carnivore or a heavier meat, lower vegetable style diet. Okay, this is kind of a hallmark of what I'll see in people that have oxalate issues. But again, just a fair warning, that doesn't mean you stay on this diet forever. It may just need to be that you need to back off of those plants for a time, allow your body enough time to cleanse out those oxalate crystals, and then you can kind of start over trying to bring some of those other higher oxalate foods back in and see how well you tolerate it. Remember, the goal of this is not to create a more and more restrictive diet so that as your life goes on, you just find yourself eating less and less and less and less. The goal of this is to understand where your body's breakdowns are, adjust those, let your body restore its own health so that it becomes more resilient and more adaptive. Because at the end of the day, you should be able to eat foods on that high oxalate list, foods on this list. Like, you should be able to do that and tolerate that well if your GI tract is healthy, if your detoxification functions are healthy, your liver, your kidney function, etc. So keep that in mind. It's not, again, I don't want to kind of overemphasize, people just kind of going full on low oxalate for the rest of their lives. That being said, here's some other food choices that you can make. These are low oxalate foods. So again, I've given you a number of different things in the vegetable category here: asparagus, broccoli, cauliflower, etc. Okay, so lots of options here. And then we get lots of options in terms of overall fruit. Lots of options here. I mentioned pumpkin seed earlier, and then herbs and spices in terms of cooking with additional foods. So you've got options here. So if you find yourself needing to go low oxalate, don't get paralyzed. Use this list as kind of a guide source to help you kind of get a little bit more diversity in your diet. But remember, the best diversity, and I think one of the reasons why we see more and more food intolerances and food issues in people today has a lot more to do with the chemicals we're putting in food, the chemicals we're putting growing food with, the way we've genetically manipulated our food, the way we have gravitated as a society toward fixing our health issues with artificial chemicals and drugs instead of addressing our own behaviors and our own choices. And so we see people that are less resilient. We see GI tracts that are less resilient, because remember, at the end of the day, one of the things that your gut is designed to do, so we look at your GI tract, right? It's a tube that goes through your body. And so, again, this is not done to scale or anatomical accuracy, but your gut is an opening, right? It's a tube. And so food comes in and waste goes out. And so there we go. Waste goes out, but this tube that is your gut, right, from your mouth to your anus, is a quarantine zone. What's its function? Its function is to take and extrapolate out the good from the bad. So it doesn't matter what we eat. Plants, remember I said earlier, oxalates are chemicals that plants produce in order to protect themselves from insects, from predators. They use it to grow a structure. So those things might not be the best for humans to consume, especially not in high quantities. But the purpose of this gut, if it's healthy, okay, big key terminology here, if healthy, right, is that it's going to be able to pull out oxalate. It's going to be able to pull out gluten, lectin, abnormal bacteria, parasitic microorganisms, okay? All different kinds of things, the chemicals, etc. If your gut is healthy, it's going to be able to take these things. It's going to be able to use mucus and secretory IgA, different types of antibodies. It's going to be able to handcuff them or bind onto them so that the things that are coming out as waste, right, are these things. And it's going to keep, your GI tract is going to keep the vitamins, the minerals, the carbs, the fats, the proteins or amino acids, and the simple sugars, and the important essential fatty acids. It's going to be able to hang on to those things to give your body the essential nutrients that it needs to nourish it. And so where people generally get in trouble is they wreck this area. Like, they just don't treat it right. They do things like eat ultra-processed foods. They do things like eat foods that they shouldn't eat. They do things like take drugs that damage the GI tract to suppress symptoms because they're not willing to change their behaviors. And so what happens is this all catches up to you at a certain point, and then the trend is that it becomes almost as if you can't eat anything, because no matter what you do, your body doesn't react very well to it because your gut is completely broken, unhealthy, and not working to do this job very well. And so the whole name of the game is, if you want more diversity back in your diet, if you want to add that diversity back in, you have to take care of your quarantine zone. You have to take care of your GI tract so that it works and functions for you as opposed to against you. So very, very important that you understand that concept. Because again, what I don't want anybody to walk away from this show tonight thinking, oh my gosh, Dr. Osborne just wants me to take out even more foods than what so I have less and less and less options, and I don't want you to feel like that's the case. So this next slide I'm going to show you is just some kind of general, it's a little complex, it's a little complicated, but here in the middle is oxalate, okay? And so what we can see happen, all these different chemicals that are surrounding this. Remember I told you earlier that mold or yeast overgrowth can contribute to oxalate formation because yeast has an enzyme called collagenase that can convert certain amino acids into precursors that help your body to produce oxalate. So if you've got candida overgrowth, it increases your risk for higher levels of oxalate. That's what this here is also referring to, that fungus piece. Okay, but then you also have up here, you can see vitamin B6. Vitamin B6 helps to take one of those chemicals in your body that would make oxalate, and it helps to get rid of it by making glycine, which is an amino acid that can help you. It can help with your DNA and your RNA repair. So low levels of vitamin B6 can contribute to elevations in oxalate because it reduces your body's ability to properly metabolize. Now, some people also, I wanted to bring this up because this is a question that sometimes comes in, ascorbate. What is ascorbate? Ascorbate is vitamin C in a nutshell. I mean, it's not what some people would call whole food-based vitamin C, but ascorbic acid, for all intents and purposes, orthomolecularly speaking, is vitamin C. And so if you're taking high doses of vitamin C, and this is extremely rare in my experience, because I use vitamin C a lot therapeutically with people, but if you're taking high doses of vitamin C, some people with oxalate toxicity, you can see that pathway, can lead to oxalate formation. So some people, when they don't do well with vitamin C, so if you're one of them, if you've ever taken high doses of vitamin C and you don't feel well, or you don't feel as good, but you're so bent on wanting to take vitamin C because you've heard, vitamin C is so healthy, it's so good for me, but every time you try to take it, you just feel worse, then you might want to consider that you've got a problem with oxalate toxicity, and that's why that vitamin C could drive that problem. Most people tolerate vitamin C perfectly well, but people with oxalate toxicity generally tend not to. So if you're finding yourself, when you're trying to use megadosing vitamin C, and you struggle and you feel worse, that could potentially be one of the reasons why that happens to you. Now, this is a lot less common with oral vitamin C, and a lot more common with IV or intravenous infusions of vitamin C. We'll see this problem occur a lot easier with the IV vitamin C. It's because with IV vitamin C, you can get your levels up super high, super fast, whereas with oral, we're limited on how much the GI tract can absorb, in a bolus or in a dose. So again, point being, if you've got a negative effect or negative impact when you take vitamin C, you might consider an oxalate toxicity issue. Now, what can we do supplementally? What are some things that we can do if we suspect oxalate toxicity? Maybe you go to your doctor and you've got, again, you've done some tests where you've got confirmation that you're producing abundance of oxalates and that your body or your system is overloaded or overburdened. There are a few different things that can be done nutritionally, supplementally. One is making sure that your B6 status is adequate. So you want to make sure B6 status is okay, right? Is in a good place. Number two, you want to look at what can bind to oxalate. Especially, there's something called oxalate dumping, which is when you go oxalate free, what happens initially is you feel better, but within a few weeks, your body starts dumping all that stored oxalate, and you can really actually feel worse for a time. But one of the things that some people find very helpful is taking calcium and magnesium. So if we're looking at like a combination CalMag, right? So CalMag can be very beneficial. So like a supplement where you're, approximately 1,000 milligrams of calcium and somewhere around 600 to 800 milligrams of magnesium. Okay, so something like this, because why? Because calcium and magnesium will bind to the oxalate and prevent that. Remember, they're crystals, and so it can bind to those, and it can help prevent them from depositing into your tissue as aggressively. One of the other things that people have reported to find beneficial is glucosamine and chondroitin. So, the supplements that some people take to collectively improve joint pain. This is actually one of the reasons why it can be effective, is that glucosamine chondroitin can minimize joint pain for several reasons, but one of the reasons is because it binds oxalate and can help to somewhat reduce oxalate. Something else that can be helpful is citrus, but particularly citrus juice. The acidity, the nature of citrus juice can break down oxalate and help your body excrete them out of you a little bit more effectively. So that may be something else that you consider, again, if you're suspecting oxalate as being a major problem. So these are just kind of some simple things that you can do that won't really hurt you. Like you can take B6, very safe to take, calcium and magnesium, very safe to take, glucosamine, chondroitin, virtually no known side effects, citrus juice, outside of that, pucker power that you might experience, really no major side effect or issue with taking any of these things. But if you find that you're having an oxalate dumping type of syndrome, these things might be helpful to kind of push you through that and get you on the other side. So all that being said, we covered pretty much everything I wanted to talk about in relationship to oxalate toxicity. So again, the take-home message is, if you've gone gluten-free, if you've gone grain-free, and you're still struggling and you're still not finding that you're improving, if you've been to multiple doctors and you tried multiple supplements and nothing's really working and you still struggle, specifically if you struggle with autoimmune rheumatoid or autoimmune arthritis or something like an interstitial cystitis, like those really are, in my experience, the two big factors that I see when people come to see me that have the oxalate issue or the potential for the oxalate issue. So hopefully that walkaway for you, that take-home message is really helpful. I'm going to open it up for questions now. JD wants to know, is there a good or better best time to take probiotics? Okay, yes, in my opinion, the best time is at night. Okay, why at night? Because when you take the probiotic at night, you give that supplemental all night to get in your GI tract and to colonize your GI tract. So as opposed to, let's say it's the course of the day, that probiotic doesn't have to compete with your food or any other supplements that you might be taking. And so at night is ideal. That's best. Outside of that, there's not really a good better. It's really any time of the day is fine, but best is at night. 80 wants to know symptoms of mold exposure. That's a little off topic, 80, but what I'm going to do is I want to refer you back to a video series I did on mold toxicity. And the reason why is the answer to that question is a really big question. And this is a 4-part series, and it goes very, very in depth on mold toxicity. So I want to refer you to that video series. If you're not subscribed, then make sure you subscribe. That way you get our video updates on a regular basis. But you can subscribe to Dr. Osborne on YouTube. And the way you do that is you go to youtube.com/glutenology. And you could make sure you hit that subscribe button. And then there's a little bell icon. Hit that little bell icon, because that little icon will tell them to send you notifications when we have new videos up. But you can type in mold toxicity on my channel, and you'll be able to pull that archived video up. Dr. Steven wants to know, quinoa, high in oxalates or medium? No, very high. Quinoa is a big no-no, and this is why so many people, they're on a gluten-free diet, and they're using quinoa in mass, kind of as a grain-based substitute, right? They're substituting quinoa instead, and they're wrecking themselves. Aside from the fact that there have been a couple of studies that show that some of the proteins in quinoa mimic gluten, quinoa is very high in oxalate. Let's see, is blanched almond flour lower in oxalate? Yes, it is. Sharon wants to know, I have a skin rash that just won't go away. Was recently tested for lupus, was negative. Okay, I didn't see a question in that. Maybe I just read it. So skin rash that won't go away, tested for lupus, negative. Sharon, if you're not on the no grain, no pain diet plan, that'd be a really great place to start. You might find some really fantastic progression in the reduction of skin inflammation as a result of following that diet. Let's see here. So Linda says, garlic is said to be like an antibiotic. I put 1 clove of raw in my fresh salads every night. Am I doing harm? I think that's a relative question, Linda. I don't necessarily think that you're doing harm. I mean, garlic has antibiotic properties, but it's not like taking amoxicillin or Cipro. It's food, and there are certainly antibiotic properties to it. I would say that depends. Are you doing harm? It depends on how you're feeling. It depends on how you're doing. You might be doing harm if you're not improving, if you're not healthy, if you're really struggling in your health. That could potentially be part of the problem, but it's really individually independent. So I wouldn't necessarily just demonize garlic. Some people don't do well with garlic because it's a higher in FODMAP, which is a carbohydrate-based element that can be very hard to digest. So there are a number of reasons why a person might not do well with garlic, but whether or not you're doing harm, it's really an individual and unique question. Does cooking foods high in oxalate lower the levels? Yeah, so that's a good question, Jane. So yeah, when you cook or you steam your spinach down really, really well, you will lower the oxalate content. And so that's one thing that you definitely can do, is you can cook those higher oxalate foods down. But even doing that, I still see some people with oxalate toxicity issues still struggle even doing that. But that's certainly something you can try to do. Okay, so let's see. Linda, thank you for noticing. So we got a new toy, right? So we got our new smart board, which just helps me, present to you the information a little bit clearer without the visual disturbance of the old whiteboard that we were using. So super glad you noticed, Linda. Thanks for noticing. Always trying to up our game for you. Okay. Just wonder, so Pearlie wants to know, hi, Dr. Osborne, just wondering if gluten can give a person eye problems. I know it's off topic, but could you do a video on gluten in the eyes? I can, and we'll put that in our queue. Pearlie, thanks for asking the question. The simple answer is yes, gluten can impact and affect eye health. I've actually seen people who went on a gluten-free diet and within months went backwards in their glasses, in their prescription. So like their vision actually started to improve as a result of getting the gluten out of their diet. So definitely, I've seen that both clinically, anecdotally, but also seen studies in the literature where you have to remember that a number of properties, not just gluten, but a number of properties of grain can actually wreak havoc on the eye. Let's see here. Keep getting spontaneous benign. Well, so if you're getting benign subepithelial oral mucosal blisters, wow, that's filled with blood. It's probably what you're eating. It's if they're happening in the mouth. If you're getting blood-filled blisters in your mouth, there's something you're being exposed to or something that you're doing either within your diet or within your toothbrush, toothpaste, or some other kind of allergen you're being exposed to that's most likely contributing to the formation of those blisters. I would want to get with a good functional medicine doc and do a full gamut of testing around that, see what it is you might be being exposed to that could be causing that. Mary wants to know, can an oxalate cause issues with muscles in your legs, heaviness and soreness? Yes, it can. Absolutely. It can cause muscle weakness, muscle heaviness, and persistent muscle soreness. So yes, very good question. I love hearing that. So Buddha Babe says, I've been gluten-free for 30 years, but going low oxalate changed my life. Yeah, so just confirmation for many of you that may already be gluten-free that aren't quite sure whether or not potentially oxalate reduction might be beneficial for you. Gene wants to know, should I be concerned if I was able to take 1,200 grams of Detox C in one day with no bowel problems? Am I fighting something off that I don't know about? I'm not quite sure I understand that question. I think if you're taking 1,200 milligrams or 1,200, you wouldn't be taking 1,200 grams, I hope. I hope you'd be taking 1,200 milligrams, 1,200 grams. That would create a heck of a diarrhea storm. But 1,200 milligrams, which is 1.2 grams, should be very easily tolerable in a vitamin C powder. Again, unless you have a major oxalate issue. The people that have high levels of oxalate toxicity, at least in my experience, generally don't tolerate vitamin C very well at all. All right, PJ says, just received your DNA test kit, gearing up for some answers after many baffling years and too many guesses. Love it, PJ. Hope that helps shed some light on the gluten issue for you. Let's see, Angeline, what is an acute oxalate nephropathy and what are the symptoms? So nephropathy is kidney damage. So remember, oxalates are crystals. And so when your kidneys are trying to filter them out into your urine, an acute nephrotoxic event would be damage, a massive amount of damage to your kidney. You might have blood in your urine as one of the potential symptoms. You might have severe pain on urination. You might have really cloudy urine. If a doctor runs a test, you might have an elevation in specific gravity. So, those can all be potential symptoms. But running some blood tests as well might be helpful. So your doctor can measure your glomerular filtration rate, your GFR, your blood urea nitrogen. You can also have some other kidney parameters done if those come back negative, but you still suspect a kidney problem. There's albumin and microalbumin tests that can be looked at. So there's a number of different kidney function marker tests that can be measured. Creatinine is another one that's very commonly run in your blood. Yeah, somebody's mentioning peanut butter. Yeah, again, peanut butter is a high oxalate food. So it's not that, again, that it by itself is going to cause kidney stones, but it certainly can contribute through its high oxalate content. Do oxalates cause thyroid nodules? Not in my experience, they don't. But that doesn't mean that they can't potentially create a problem for your thyroid gland. Remember, oxalates are an equal opportunity tissue destroyer, just like gluten. They can damage any tissue in the body. It doesn't have to be just limited to your joints or to your bladder. Let's see. So Linda says, Dr. O says, don't kid yourself. Listen, I was grain-free for a year, still splurged on milk, chocolate, and coconut sugar. I've stopped those plus tomatoes, potatoes, legumes. My pain level dropped immediately. Love it. Thank you for sharing your experience, Linda. Don't kid yourself. Look, remember, there's 3 rules to eating. If we really want to look at kind of the primary rules to eating that you should live by. And the rule number 1 is you can't get health eating food that isn't healthy. So if the food, if you like, for example, chocolate with sugar in it, healthy or not, I mean, the sugar in and of itself, processed sugar is not good for you. So that's a no-brainer. So don't lie to yourself. Like, if you lie to yourself, you're going to struggle. And a lot of people lie to themselves because they don't want to give a food up. Like, they're just not ready for that, maybe psychologically, maybe emotionally. But remember that all progress begins with the brutal truth. And that means the brutal truth to yourself. Don't lie to yourself. So rule number 1, you can't get healthy eating food that is not healthy. Number 2, rule number 2 is listen. Listen what? Listen to your body. Your body is going to talk to you. And sometimes your body talks to you with pain. Right? The symptoms, doctors love to label symptoms disease, and then they love to give you a pill to artificially manipulate your chemistry to reduce your symptoms in the name of compassion, right? I want you to not have pain, so here, take this pill. To me, that's pseudo-compassion. It's false compassion because it begins the story with a lie. The real truth is, why do you hurt? So listen to your body. If every time you eat a food or every time you eat a conglomeration of things and it causes you grief or strife or exacerbates your medical condition or your disease or your symptoms, then listen, pay attention, right? So that's rule number 2. And rule number 3 is don't eat what you're allergic to. And, to know that, there's 2 ways. One is to listen to your body, right? Don't eat food you're allergic to. And one of the ways you know what you're allergic to is by listening to your body. But sometimes when you listen to your body, you do a kind of a diet where you write down everything that you eat, a symptom log next to that. Sometimes you don't pick up on some of the more subtle allergies. There's something called a delayed hypersensitivity, which is, the window of reaction can be as quickly as 3 hours, but as delayed as 3 weeks. And so if you have a delayed response, sometimes it's hard to listen to your body if you're reacting to something that you consumed a few weeks ago. So sometimes this step number 3, it's best if you test for delayed response. And this is where when you're struggling at home, maybe you've done everything you know to do, maybe you're following everything you know health-wise, but you're still struggling. This is when you jump off of the DIY wagon. You know what that means. DIY means do it yourself. Sometimes you can save a lot of grief, a lot of time, a lot of stress, a lot of money by asking an expert, somebody who's qualified, somebody who's well-versed in functional medicine, and they can help you. They can help you do these types of things so that you can get more meaningful answers more quickly. Okay. So another question coming in. How to ease the pain in stomach. So that's kind of a broad question. I mean, Rosalind, it just depends. It depends on what's causing the pain in the stomach. I'd say as a very generalized, very generic answer, step 1 would be get a copy of No Grain, No Pain and follow phase 1 and phase 2 diets for 30 days. If you don't notice a dramatic improvement in your stomach after doing that, follow up with a really qualified functional medicine trained doc. Many of you may not even realize, but I practice regularly. I see clients 3 days a week, and the reason why I do that, I'll never quit practicing because I think doctors lose their relevancy when they quit practicing, when they go off to just kind of be in the world of academia. I think a big part of their relevancy and their experience starts to deteriorate and go away very quickly. So a practicing doctor who isn't guessing, who knows how to do the right kind of testing, who's trained in functional medicine, would be, in my opinion, would be one of the best things that you can do when you're still struggling. We got some folks asking if we can send the list. I guess you're referring to the list of the different foods. So here's one of the things that you should be aware of. So if you go to glutenfreesociety.org, let me put that link up for you. Glutenfreesociety.org. On that website, there's a blog, and anytime I do a show, anytime I talk about an in-depth, detailed topic for you, you should know that we have those graphics and that information all there for you, free of charge. It's all there. It's all up on glutenfreesociety.org. One of the reasons why you should be subscribing, if you're not already, to glutenfreesociety.org's free newsletter that comes out a couple of times a week is so that you can get access to this information when we publish new things. In that way, you can stay abreast of all things health and wellness-wise as it relates not just to the gluten-free diet, but as a general rule of thumb, our mission is to help people with autoimmune disease and autoimmune struggles find real solutions and real answers. So all those graphics and all the things that you see me use are available to you at no charge. Remember, we're trying to save 100 million lives, so we want to make those things available, but you need to go and subscribe so that you're getting that information mailed to your inbox. Okay. Can you give your thoughts on oxalate dumping when you quickly lower eating them and when you have an issue with stored oxalates in tissues and bones? Yeah, so good question, Kelly. I'm glad you asked. So those of you that don't know, when you just completely go oxalate, low oxalate, or oxalate free, one of the things that can happen is you feel better for a week, maybe even 2 weeks, and then your body's tissue starts to dump oxalate rapidly. And so then you start declining, you start feeling worse. And so this goes back to what I was talking about a minute ago. It's one of the reasons why I put this up there. Oxalate dumping is a very real phenomenon. And so what can you do to try to help minimize some of the symptoms associated with oxalate dumping is you can use some of these general supplements to kind of help mitigate that transition. But the other thing that you can do, so we're talking about oxalate dumping, right? One of the other things that you can do is taper, instead of just going total oxalate free, taper into a low or reduced oxalate diet. Don't just quit everything cold turkey, but kind of work your way down slowly over the course of a few weeks, and kind of let your body taper down and tap into kind of excreting some of the stored oxalates, so that you're not just creating a oxalate dumping scenario. So taper it down would be good advice. Let's see here. Rosalind says, I was grain-free for 2 years, but I still have a lot of pain at night. Is potato bad? Well, potatoes high in oxalate and can be one of the reasons why you're still struggling. If you read No Grain, No Pain, including white potatoes, if you read No Grain, No Pain, it's one of the reasons why that food is off the list. There's actually a couple of reasons why. One is its high toxicity level of oxalate, and number two is that potato has a compound called solenoid, which is potato is part of the nightshade family, and so the solenoids, plant-based compounds that also are known to create inflammatory pain in individuals as well. So, but for that reason, if you're grain-free still struggling, potato might be something that's also contributing, but again, for more reasons than just oxalate. Do enzyme supplements help break down oxalate? No. No, enzymes don't really do much for oxalate. At least I haven't seen any literature on it, and I haven't seen any clinical evidence, experience-wise, that would help me believe that happens. Again, going back to, I didn't add would be a probiotic on this list. If you really want to improve your body's ability to tolerate oxalate, one of the things that you can do is take a good probiotic, especially a high doses of lactobacillus. Now, currently you can't get a probiotic that contains Oxalobacter, which is one of the types of bacteria that we know can help in the metabolism and breakdown of oxalate. That's not commercially available. It's being studied right now in different research trials. It probably will be commercially available in coming years, but don't hold your breath and wait for that. You can start with a probiotic that has high levels of lactobacillus, and if you want to be effective, I wouldn't do anything really, probably less than at least 50 billion colony-forming units, CFU. That's the dose delineation for probiotics is called a CFU, or a colony-forming unit. So I get a lot of those over-the-counter probiotics that you buy. They're like 10 billion. In some cases, they're in the millions, right? You really got to get upwards of 50 billion for it to be any kind of effective at all. So Mary says, I bake with a lot of almond flour and eat a lot of snap peas. I eat a lot of things on the list. That doesn't mean you can't continue to do that. Again, go back to what I said tonight when we started this conversation, is that just because I'm talking about oxalate, look, if your health is solid, if you're feeling really good, if you're following No Grain, No Pain, that doesn't mean you need to also jump on a low oxalate bandwagon. It's just that many of you do everything right, or what you think is right, and you're still struggling. And I wanted to give you some insight into how oxalate might be one of those reasons that you still struggle. And so again, it's not a kind of a full-on recommendation that everybody in the world goes on a low oxalate diet. I personally have a one salad a day rule. I don't eat more than one serving of greens in the course of a day. I know a lot of people are like, well, you need to have lots of greens. No, for me, I don't do well. My joints gum up. I don't perform as well. I don't have the energy. I don't have the brain capacity that I would otherwise have. So if I overconsume greens, I'm not oxalate toxic, but I think I'm a little sensitive to too many oxalates at the same time. So I feel much better when I don't overconsume on the greens. I know some people have the opposite experience of that. They process oxalates very, very well. Again, it's biochemical uniqueness. What is your biochemical blueprint, so to speak? Not one size rules fit all. So you got to keep that in mind. Let's see here. I can handle most. Okay, not a question. How can you tell if your supplements have oxalates. Generally, they're not going to have oxalates because in the process of creating vitamins and minerals, there aren't oxalates inherently in those things. If we're talking about just general supplement like multivitamin, B vitamin complex, mineral supplements, that kind of thing. Where you might run into trouble with oxalates are certain plant-based types of supplements, heavy doses of turmeric, for example. And so that's where you'd want to be cautious about oxalate as a potential. So it's going to be more in your plant-based herbals. It's going to be more in your plant-based vitamins or your whole food source-based vitamins where they use foods as a source of the vitamin. And if you're oxalate sensitive, then that's where you might find some of those things. But in just generalized purified vitamins and minerals, not really an issue. Yeah, so Ann wants to know, avocados on both lists. It's because if an avocado is ripe versus an avocado not being ripe, the more ripe an avocado becomes, the lower oxalate content because oxalates are breaking down. So you got to remember it provides some of the central structure for avocado. And so as it ripens, those compounds break down, which is good, right? This is one of the reasons why we cook food, is it helps break down difficult to digest compounds. Well, ripening is a part. You don't want to eat a bunch of fruits or vegetables that aren't quite ready to be eaten yet, right? That generally means they're going to contain a lot more concentrated versions of certain plant compounds because they're still trying to grow and they're still trying to protect themselves as they're growing, which means they may have higher concentrations of those things. Okay, let's see, keep going down that. So Sarah says, back it up just one fuzz. There we go. Sarah says, carnivore diet seems to agree with me. Even eating lettuce seems to slow down my entire system for 5 or 6 days. I think it's a fiber issue and not oxalate. Fruit seems to be okay. Yeah, that can be true too. And that's why I wanted to bring that up. Is that carnivore may seem to, so not necessarily carnivore, because if you're eating fruit, that's technically not carnivore, but just eating less vegetables as a whole. Remember, vegetables for some people can be more challenging to digest. As a rule of thumb, fruits have digestive enzymes in them. So if you ever, bit into a mango, if you've ever bitten into like a really good ripe pineapple, if you ever bit into like a really good peach, they almost dissolve in your mouth, right? And why is that? Because they have their own digestive enzymes in them that help you to digest them. So they come kind of ready to eat, so to speak. But many vegetables are really challenging to digest, which is why we cook them. It's why we steam them until they're soft, because they're harder to digest and they don't have an array or a battery of enzymes that kind of help you break them down intrinsically. So what you may be finding there, Sarah, is that certain fruits that digest themselves or help to digest themselves, that's why you tolerate them well, where you don't tolerate vegetables as well. Let's see here. Can drinking a teaspoon of baking soda help with oxalate foods? It can. And taking a calcium magnesium supplement can help with oxalate foods as well. What I would caution you about with baking soda is some brands of baking soda contain corn filler. So you might be getting some corn gluten, getting glutened in that regard. So you've got to make sure that you are careful in that. Let's see. So I can't know if I don't know if I'm going to pronounce your name right or wrong. Duthatha says, I can't afford no grain, no pain copy. Duthatha, go to the library. It's in every major library in the United States. You can check a copy out. It doesn't cost you a cent. It's free. You can also go to glutenfreesociety.org and subscribe and start getting the information that you need to start making meaningful changes. Money should not be an obstacle for any of you tuning in. You know my mission, and you know where my heart is. My heart is in helping people, and that's why I do this show every Monday for you, and that's why we have so many free resources that cost an incredible amount of time and money and resources. It cost me that. But we do that as a public service. So, money should not be an obstacle for you. The answers are there and the information is there. So get on over to the library and get you a copy. Okay. So am I better on a keto diet while dumping oxalates? No, not necessarily. So PJ wants to know, is there a reliable or honest place where I can find the basic nutrient content of fruit and veggie foods, one that shows which foods contains the most beneficial vitamins and minerals? There are lots of places, PJ. I mean, probably the easiest and the best thing to do is buy yourself a nutrition almanac that, it contains information from multiple databases across the world about the nutritional value and content of different foods. But what you have to understand is none of these books and none of these resources are going to be 100% accurate 100% of the time, because the way the food is farmed today, the nutrient quality, really honestly it's based on the soil, it's based on the region that it's grown in. So like if we take, for example, a Florida orange versus a Texas orange, are they going to be exactly the same? No, they're probably not. And there are a number of factors with weather and with bugs and insects and other variables that might alter or change the nature of the nutritional density of that fruit. And so no one book or no one resource is going to be the end-all be-all resource for you to follow. So you kind of got to keep that in mind. An almanac is kind of a generalization of knowledge collected over time, but it's not going to be a definitive Bible, if you will, of exacts. Let's see here. How do you test for delayed response? Several ways, but there's 6 different types of delayed reactions. A lot of doctors will just test the IgG, but that's an inaccurate and incomplete way to test for delayed hypersensitivity. So another question coming in about timing on probiotics. That's a big question tonight. Again, the timing is not really all that relevant. If you're going to really maximize your probiotic, in my opinion, you take it at night before you go to bed, and you give that bacteria time to get into your GI tract and colonize while you're asleep, and not influencing it with any other potential medications or other things you might be being exposed to. Okay. Is it realistic to not consume grains again? Sure it is. I haven't consumed grains in 20 years, Isaiah. And I feel like I'm pretty fit and pretty healthy. And I see it in my clinic. For 20 years, I've seen it. People becoming more fit and more healthy, not eating grains. So I think to answer that question, it's very realistic. I think the bigger question is, can you wrap your mind around the possibility that it's realistic for you? Maybe even a better question than that would be, is it the right move for you to make? I mean, the first step in understanding whether you should or shouldn't eat grains is really to get tested for gluten sensitivity. Wilton wants to know, why can't I get the products in the UK? Wilton, we don't have a distributorship in the UK. If you know somebody who wants to become a distributor, we're happy to entertain a conversation with them. You can't get our supplements in the UK unless you want to pay. It's a pretty hefty shipping price. But what you can get is you can get genetic testing. You can get DNA testing in any country in the world. That actually can be shipped globally. But the supplements, the cost of shipping can become a barrier for many people. Is it okay to drink water all day on a low-carb diet, or do we need electrolytes? Well, yeah, you also need electrolytes. If your water is reverse osmosis filtered, you definitely want to add a source of electrolytes. And we could actually add, I would add ultra electrolytes to this list, as a supplement, rich in trace minerals and electrolytes, because again, one of the things that oxalates likes to do is it likes to bind up your minerals. And so this is one of the reasons why somebody asked the question earlier, can oxalates create muscle weakness? Can they create muscle fatigue and cramping? And that they absolutely can. And this is one of the reasons why they bind to your electrolytes, and it can create a problem. So if you're drinking a lot of water, especially if it's filtered with reverse osmosis, which is the best filter, by the way, if you live in the city, because I'd rather see you filter out all the toxic chemicals, compounds with RO, and add electrolytes back to the water than drink city water, which is full. In the Houston area where I live, there's 42 prescription medications that we can identify in the drinking water. And your town is probably no different, because so many people abuse their bodies and don't make the right decisions. And so they're on multiple medications, and then they're poisoning our drinking water as a result of flushing old drugs down the toilet as a result of urinating out unmetabolized drugs, and that stuff ends up in our groundwater, which is then recirculated back into your drinking water. So it's very critical that you filter your drinking water if you live in the city. Now, if you're on your own well, not so much. If you're drinking well water, it probably has enough total dissolved solids in it, which is going to be more rich in electrolytes and other ground-based minerals. So you don't have to worry so much about adding electrolytes back to like a well water source. Okay. Man, questions just keep coming, but I think we're out of time. Wow, I think I've gone way over here. So, I got caught away. So thanks for joining us this Monday evening. I hope this was helpful for you. Hey, make sure you come over and visit me at glutenfreesociety.org. If you're not subscribed already, get subscribed. If you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, get subscribed. Look, the more areas you have to connect with us, the more we can ensure that our information makes it into your inbox, makes it into your notifications. Remember, folks like me today, we're highly, highly being censored. So the more ways you have to communicate with me, the less ways you're going to, or the less potential that my information is going to be censored from ending up in your inbox. So just make sure you go and connect with me through my different channels and platforms so that you can keep getting this great information on a weekly basis. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your week, and we'll see you next Monday night for another episode of Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Take care. Hey, don't forget to tune in next week, same time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, for another Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain show. Bring all your toughest health questions to me. I look forward to answering them. And before you leave today, make sure you hit subscribe. And once you do, click that bell. That bell is going to allow us to remind you right before we go live. But it's also going to allow us to remind you when we come out with other video content all week long. We've got lots of episodes coming your way all week long, and I don't want you to miss anything. So again, subscribe, hit that bell so that you can get notified when we have that new information put up for you. Thanks so much, and I'm wishing you excellent health. Have a great week. We'll see you next Monday night.